In the heart of a dense, fog-ridden town called Draycote, the local pizzeria, Tony's Pizza Heaven, stood as a beacon of warmth and delicious aromas amid the grey, unsettling weather that often enveloped the town. The pizzeria was famous not only for its savoury pies but also for its long-standing history of peculiar occurrences tied to its deliveries after dark. One fateful evening, as twilight merged into the inky blues of night, a young delivery boy named Alex was given a late order. The address was to the old Fairwick residence at the edge of town, a place rumoured to be cursed after the entire family mysteriously disappeared one stormy night decades ago. Since then, the house had stood empty, or so it was believed. Alex, a college student working part-time, wasn't a believer in ghost stories. Armed with a pepperoni pizza and a disarming smile, he set off in his old car, the heater struggling against the creeping cold. The GPS led him through winding roads, the fog thickening with each mile, swallowing the weak beams of his headlights. Arriving at the residence, Alex found the mansion silhouetted against the moonlight, its windows dark, the structure a monolith of shadows. A chill ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Shaking off his unease, he grabbed the pizza and walked up to the front door, which, to his surprise, was slightly ajar. "Hello," he called out, pushing the door open with a slow creak. No response. Pizza delivery. The air inside smelled of mildew and decay. Alex's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. As he stepped further inside, the floorboards groaned under his weight. He made his way to the grand staircase, thinking the customer might be upstairs. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the hallway, extinguishing his flashlight. Heart racing, Alex fumbled with his lighter, the small flame casting eerie shadows across the grand portraits lining the walls. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he moved. "Is anyone here?" His voice echoed off the walls, met only by the unsettling silence. Then, upstairs, a door slammed shut. The sound was sharp, a definitive bang that seemed to resonate throughout the entire house. Swallowing his fear, Alex ascended the stairs, each step creaking ominously. At the top, the hallway was lined with doors, all closed. The silence was oppressive, heavy with anticipation. He approached the door that seemed to have slammed, his hand shaking as he reached for the knob. It was ice cold to the touch. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside, the room was bathed in moonlight, the windows open to the night air. The room appeared untouched by time, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. A child's room, with toys scattered on the floor and a rocking horse gently moving back and forth as if just recently abandoned. A giggle echoed from the corner of the room, soft and chilling. Alex spun around, his lighter flickering. In the shadows, he could make out the figure of a small child, barely discernible. "Who are you?" Alex managed to stammer, his voice cracking under the strain of fear. "I just want to play," the child's voice whispered, as another gust of wind blew through the room, stronger this time. The door slammed shut behind him, plunging the room into darkness. Alex stumbled back, his heart pounding in his ears. He tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out," he shouted, pounding on the wood with his fists. Laughter, cruel and mocking, filled the room. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the air. Then, just as suddenly, the room fell silent. The door creaked open slowly. Alex didn't wait. He sprinted from the room, down the hallway, and didn't stop until he was back in his car, slamming the door and locking it. He sat, panting, his heart racing. Looking up at the house, he saw a figure in the window of the room he had just fled. It was watching him. His car struggled to start, the engine whining in protest. Finally, it turned over, and he drove away from the Fairwick residence, the house disappearing into the fog behind him. Alex vowed never to return, to forget the night's horrors. But the story didn't end there. His encounter at the Fairwick house was only the beginning. As he arrived back at Tony's Pizza Heaven, his boss approached him with another delivery order. The address on the slip made his blood run cold. It was for the Fairwick residence again. This time, the note simply said, "Come back, we're still hungry." Alex stared at the slip, his hands trembling. "There must be some mistake," he stammered, handing the slip back to his boss. "No mistake. It just came through. And it's marked urgent," his boss replied, eyes wide with confusion at Alex's pale face and shaking hands. "I can't go back there," Alex said, the memory of the child's chilling laughter still echoing in his ears. His boss, sensing his distress, frowned. "What happened, Alex?" Alex took a deep breath and recounted the night's eerie events. His boss listened, growing more concerned with every detail Alex provided. After a pause, he nodded solemnly. "Okay, you stay. I'll handle this one. But you're sure it was empty?" "As sure as I am about anything," Alex replied, his voice just above a whisper. With a nod, his boss grabbed the keys to the delivery van and left, leaving Alex alone in the pizzeria. The light seemed to flicker, casting ghostly shadows across the walls. Alex tried to calm his racing heart, telling himself it was just a house, just a child's prank. But the cold dread lodged in his chest refused to dissipate. Minutes turned into hours, and Alex's boss did not return. The clock ticked past midnight, and the phone rang, shattering the silence. Alex jumped, his nerves frayed. He answered the phone with a shaky hand. "Tony's Pizza Heaven, how may I help you?" His voice was tense, expectant. Silence on the other end. Then a whisper, so soft he almost didn't catch it. "Come back." The line went dead. Alex stood frozen, the phone slipping from his hand and clattering onto the counter. Panic seized him. He had to find his boss, to make sure he was okay. Grabbing his coat, Alex locked up the pizzeria and drove back to the Fairwick residence. The fog was thicker than before, enveloping his car like a shroud. He drove slowly, peering through the gloom, the house emerging like a spectre from the mist. The front door stood open, just as he had left it hours earlier. He hesitated, then, with a deep breath, stepped inside. Their house was silent, save for the creaking of the old floorboards under his weight. "Hello." His voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. He flicked on his flashlight, the beam slicing through the black. Moving cautiously, he made his way to the grand staircase, each step echoing ominously around him. He reached the top, heart pounding in his chest. The door to the child's room was ajar. He pushed it open slowly. The room was empty, no sign of the child or his boss. But on the floor, in the center of the room, lay a pizza box, still warm. Alex approached it, dread tightening his stomach. Inside, the pizza was untouched, except for a single piece removed. Then he heard it, a soft sobbing sound coming from the attic. It was faint, but unmistakable. He followed the sound, finding a narrow staircase hidden behind a false wall in the hallway. The sobbing grew louder as he ascended. The attic was cluttered with old furniture and boxes. His flashlight flickered, casting surreal shadows that seemed to move just at the edge of his vision. The sobbing stopped abruptly as he reached the far end of the attic. There, tied to a chair, was his boss, his head drooping forward, unconscious or worse. Alex rushed to him, checking for a pulse. It was faint but there. He sighed in relief, then set about untying him. As he worked, the air grew inexplicably cold, and the faint sound of children laughing echoed around them. Alex's boss stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Run," he murmured, just as the laughter grew into a cacophony. Alex looked up, his flashlight beam catching on something in the shadows. Children, at least a dozen, their eyes hollow, their expressions vacant. They moved towards them, slow and deliberate. He grabbed his boss, pulling him to his feet. "We have to get out of here," Alex said, half dragging, half carrying him down the stairs. They reached the main floor, the laughter following them, filling the house with its eerie sound. Alex's heart raced as they stumbled towards the door, the children's voices whispering just behind them. They burst out into the fog, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. Alex didn't stop, didn't look back, until they reached the car. He threw his boss inside, slammed the door, and jumped into the driver's seat. As he started the car, the headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the front of the house. The children stood there, watching them, a silent group framed in the mist, their eyes reflecting the car's lights like glass. Alex's breath came in sharp gasps as he slammed his foot on the accelerator, the tires screeching against the gravel as the car lurched forward. They sped away from the house, leaving the ghostly children behind, fading into the fog as if they were mere illusions. As they drove, the only sounds were the heavy breathing of Alex and his boss, and the car's engine thrumming through the night. Alex's boss was pale, his eyes haunted. "They wanted to keep us there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "to play their twisted games forever." "What are they?" Alex asked, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the children following them. "I don't know, but it's not just a haunted house, Alex. It's something far worse." "We need help," his boss said, pulling out his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed. The phone call was brief, his boss speaking hurriedly, arranging for someone to meet them. "We're going to the church," he said as he ended the call. "Father Michaels can help us, I hope." The church was a small, old building on the outskirts of Draycote, its steeple piercing the night sky. They arrived, the building a sanctuary in the eerie stillness of the night. Father Michaels was waiting for them at the entrance, a look of grave concern on his face. "What happened?" Father Michaels asked as they hurried inside. As Alex and his boss recounted the night's terror, the priest listened intently, his face growing increasingly troubled. "This is no ordinary haunting," Father Michaels said after a moment. "It's an infestation, a malevolent presence that's taken root in the house. And now, it seems it's reaching out, spreading its influence. What can we do?" Alex asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "We must perform a cleansing, an exorcism of the property. But it will not be easy, nor is it guaranteed to succeed," Father Michaels replied, his tone serious. "But first, you must rest. We will need all our strength come morning." They were led to a small room with a couple of cots. Exhaustion overtook them, and despite their fears, sleep came quickly. But it was a restless sleep, filled with nightmares of laughing children and endless corridors. Alex woke before dawn, a sense of unease pulling him from his dreams. He looked over to see his boss still asleep, then got up and walked to the church's main area. Father Michaels was already there, setting up what looked like an altar with various religious artifacts and old, leather-bound books. "Good, you're awake. We don't have much time. The dawn is when the veil between worlds is thinnest. We must prepare," Father Michaels said, handing Alex a small cross. "Carry this at all times." As the first light of dawn began to filter through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the stone floor, they prepared to leave for the Fairwick residence. The air was tense, charged with a palpable sense of impending confrontation. They drove in silence, the early morning mist still enveloping the town in its cold embrace. When they arrived at the Fairwick residence, the house seemed even more menacing in the dim light of dawn, shadows clinging to it like a dark shroud. Father Michaels led them to the front door, his steps resolute. He began to chant in Latin, his voice steady and clear. Alex and his boss followed, each clutching a cross. As they entered the house, the air shifted, becoming colder, denser. They could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon them, watching their every move. Father Michaels's chants grew louder as they made their way to the main hall. There, the air shimmered, and the shadows began to coalesce, forming the vague shapes of children, their features blurred and indistinct. The temperature dropped further, and a low moan echoed through the hall, rising and falling like the wind. "We are here to reclaim this place," Father Michaels proclaimed, his voice echoing through the halls. "Begone from here, spirits of darkness and despair." The shadows swirled faster, becoming more defined, more threatening. The children's faces became clearer, their expressions twisted in rage and malice. They advanced, their forms flickering like flames in a draught. Alex felt a chill run down his spine as the figures approached. They were surrounded now, the ghostly children closing in, their laughter no longer playful but ominous, filled with a chilling intent. Father Michaels continued his chants, louder now, the words resonating through the house like a bell. The confrontation was at its height, the air crackling with the energy of the battle being waged. The outcome was uncertain, the danger real and palpable. As the spirits converged on them, their ethereal forms shimmering with an otherworldly glow, Alex felt the fear rise in his throat. The cold was seeping into his bones, making every breath a painful gasp. The figures were nearly upon them, their faces now inches from his own, their eyes empty voids that seemed to pull at his soul. Father Michaels's voice rose over the crescendo of chilling winds and ghostly wails, his Latin incantations forceful and commanding. He held a crucifix high, its surface gleaming in the dim light, casting holy reflections on the dark walls. Suddenly, the air burst with a brilliant light, radiating from Father Michaels's crucifix. The shadows recoiled as if burned, their forms dissipating momentarily before regrouping. The light had hurt them, that much was clear. Father Michaels, seizing the moment, stepped forward, pressing deeper into the heart of the spectral crowd. "Stay behind me," he instructed Alex and his boss, who were clutching their own crosses tightly, their faces etched with both fear and awe. The spectral children hissed and moaned, their forms swirling around the edges of the holy light, but they could not penetrate the radiant barrier that Father Michaels had summoned. They made their way to the grand staircase, where the air felt even colder, the atmosphere charged with a malignant presence. As they ascended, the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, whispers and groans emanating from the very woodwork. At the top of the stairs, the corridor stretched into darkness, lined with doors that seemed to creak and moan with spectral sorrow. Father Michael stopped, his face stern and concentrated. He turned to Alex and his boss. "We must find the heart of the house, the center of its power. It is likely where the family met their fate, where the spirits are strongest," he explained, his voice steady despite the oppressive atmosphere. They continued down the hallway, each door they passed whispered secrets of old, the air filled with the stench of decay and the bitter tang of old fear. They reached a door at the far end of the hall, larger and more ornate than the others. Father Michaels paused, a bead of sweat trailing down his temple despite the cold. "This is it," he murmured and pushed the door open. Inside, the room was vast, the walls lined with ancient portraits that seemed to watch them enter with silent accusation. In the center of the room, a large pentagram had been etched into the floor, candles at each point still burning with a faint, ghostly flame. The air inside was suffocating, the darkness palpable. Father Michaels began his incantations once more, his voice echoing around the room. Alex and his boss positioned themselves back to back, their eyes scanning the shadows that seemed to creep ever closer. The room began to shake, a low rumble that grew in intensity until it was as if the earth itself were quaking. The spectral children appeared again, emerging from the walls, the floor, the very air around them. They converged towards the pentagram, their forms blurring into a vortex of shadows. The candles flared, casting a sickly green light across the room, illuminating the faces of the children, their expressions twisted in rage and pain. Father Michaels's chants became shouts, powerful and commanding. The crucifix in his hands glowed with a blinding light, and the room filled with the sound of 1,000 winds. Alex felt the power surge through the room, a wave of holy energy that swept through the shadows like a cleansing fire. The children screamed, their voices a cacophony of despair as the light washed over them. One by one, their forms dissipated, melting away into the air until only one remained. This figure was different, larger, its features more defined, a boy, no older than 10, his eyes filled with tears and fire. "Why do you resist?" Father Michaels asked, his voice softer now, but still filled with the authority of his faith. "We are bound," the boy replied, his voice echoing with a timeless sorrow. "Bound to repeat our fate, forever lost, forever hungry." "There is peace for you beyond this," Father Michaels said, stepping closer to the pentagram. "Let me help you find it." The boy looked around at the empty room, the remnants of his spectral companions gone, then back at Father Michaels. A tear ran down his cheek, glimmering in the candlelight. "Please," he whispered. Father Michaels extended his hand, the crucifix still glowing warmly. The boy reached out, his hand ghostly pale. As they touched, a light brighter than any before filled the room, washing everything in its pure brilliance. When the light faded, the boy was gone. The room felt lighter, the air fresher. Father Michaels turned to Alex and his boss, exhaustion etched into his features. "It is done," he said simply. But as the echoes of the boy's final plea faded into the newfound silence of the room, a creeping unease began to gnaw at Alex. The atmosphere, though seemingly cleared, now pulsed with a quiet tension, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Father Michaels, sensing the shift, narrowed his eyes, scanning the room with a wary gaze. "It's not over," he muttered, almost to himself. "That was too easy. Something else lurks here." They left the room, the weight of the house's history pressing down on them as they moved. As they descended the grand staircase, the wood beneath their feet groaned more loudly than before, a mournful sound that seemed to resonate with a lingering sadness. Back in the main hall, the light from Father Michaels's crucifix no longer seemed as bright. Shadows clung more stubbornly to the corners, as if resisting the dwindling sanctity the priest had conjured. "We need to check the basement," Father Michaels said, his voice firm, betraying no hint of the fatigue that Alex saw etched deeply in the lines of his face. The basement of the Fairwick residence was accessed through a narrow door hidden behind a heavy, moth-eaten curtain in the dining hall, a room they had previously hurried through. Now, as they approached the door, a cold draught seeped from the cracks, carrying with it the faint, unmistakable scent of decay. With a solemn nod from Father Michaels, Alex pulled the door open. The stairs descending into darkness appeared less inviting than any path they had trod thus far. The priest began another series of chants, his voice echoing down the dank staircase as they descended. The basement was expansive, a labyrinth of stone and dirt, with corridors branching off into shadowed recesses filled with forgotten relics of the house's past residents. Old furniture covered in white sheets, boxes of yellowed books, and toys that had not felt the touch of children's hands for decades littered the space. Their flashlights flickered as they moved deeper, the air growing colder, the breaths turning visible in the icy chill that enveloped them. The darkness seemed to absorb the light, making their progress feel sluggish and heavy. As they reached the heart of the basement, they found an old well, its structure made of crumbling stones, the opening sealed with a heavy wooden lid. The wood was rotten, marked with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. "This is it," Father Michaels said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where it all began." He set his bag down, pulling out a small bottle of holy water and a Bible worn from years of use. He began to sprinkle the holy water around the well, each droplet hissing as it hit the ground, the air filling with the smell of ozone. Alex watched, his flashlight aimed at the dark corners of the basement, half expecting something to leap from the shadows. His boss stood close, his body tensed, ready for whatever might come. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them, a low rumble that grew in intensity until it shook the very foundations of the house. The wooden lid of the well burst apart, splinters flying as a dark mist began to seep out, swirling around them with malevolent intent. Father Michaels continued his chants, louder now, his voice competing with the growling that rose from the depths of the well. The mist formed into shapes, vague human figures that reached out with wispy hands, their touch colder than ice. Alex felt a chill deep in his bones as one of the figures brushed against him, its touch a whisper of despair that threatened to pull him into a void of unending darkness. He stepped back, nearly tripping over a box behind him. "We must close it," Father Michaels shouted over the din, his hand clutching the Bible so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Help me." Together, they began to recite the Lord's Prayer, their voices a beacon of hope in the creeping darkness. The figures recoiled with each verse, the mist beginning to dissipate, but not quickly enough. As they reached the climactic Amen, a scream tore through the basement, a sound so anguished and raw that it stilled the air itself. The ground settled, and for a moment, everything was silent. But the silence was short-lived. From the depths of the well, a new sound emerged, a laugh, low and menacing, reverberating against the stone walls, promising that the true horror of the Fairwick residents had only just begun to reveal itself. The laughter echoing from the depths of the well grew louder, more derisive, as if the darkness itself mocked their efforts. Father Michaels, face etched with grim determination, thrust his hand into his bag, pulling out a small, ancient-looking crucifix made of silver. He held it aloft, the artifact glowing with a soft, ethereal light that seemed to pulse in time with their racing hearts. "This is the cross of Saint Meridius," he shouted over the chilling laughter, forged in the 3rd century and imbued with the essence of one of the Church's greatest exorcists. "It's our last hope." They gathered closely around the well, the silver cross casting its holy light into the abyss below. The laughter ceased abruptly, replaced by a howling wind that surged up from the well, smelling of sulfur and decay. The temperature dropped, their breath visible in icy plumes as they recited prayers, their voices united and strong. The figures in the mist began to solidify, becoming more distinct, more menacing. They could see now that they were not just shadows, but the tormented souls of the past, twisted and corrupted by the darkness that had claimed them. These spirits surged upwards, their faces contorted in rage and agony. Father Michael stepped forward, his faith unwavering. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you to return to the darkness from whence you came." His voice boomed, resonant with divine power. The crucifix blazed brighter, a pillar of pure light shooting down into the well. The spirits shrieked, their forms disintegrating under the intensity of the light. One by one, they vanished, sucked back into the void, their cries echoing in the cavernous depths. But then, from the shadows beyond the well, a new figure emerged. It was more formidable than the others, its presence so oppressive that it seemed to suck the light from the room. This spirit did not attack but stood watching, its eyes deep pools of malice and intelligence. "You cannot banish me so easily, priest," it spoke, its voice a chilling blend of honey and venom. "I am the keeper of this place, bound here by blood and tragedy." Father Michaels faced the spirit, his expression solemn. "Then we shall break the bonds that hold you, release the innocents you've enslaved, and cleanse this place once and for all." The spirit laughed, a sound that made the air tremble. "Try and fail, as many before you have." With a final prayer, Father Michaels thrust the crucifix forward, the silver glowing hotly. The spirit recoiled as the light from the crucifix enveloped it, the battle of wills palpable in the charged air. Alex and his boss, standing by Father Michaels, added their own prayers to his, their voices lending strength to the incantations, their faith bolstering the priest's efforts. The spirit faltered, its form beginning to fray at the edges. The room shook violently, stones from the ceiling crashing down around them, dust clouding the air. But still, Father Michaels held the crucifix steady, his voice unwavering as he delivered the final rites. With a deafening scream that echoed through the foundations of the house, the spirit dissipated, a final burst of ethereal light marking its passing. The ground settled, the air cleared, and a profound silence filled the space. They stood there, panting, covered in dust and sweat, the relief palpable among them. Father Michaels looked around, his face weary but filled with a deep, satisfying peace. "It's done," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the now serene basement. "The spirits are at rest, the curse lifted." As they ascended the stairs back to the main floor, the house felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from its shoulders. They exited the front door, stepping out into the dawn light, which seemed brighter, more hopeful than before. Driving back to town, the events of the night felt like a distant nightmare, but the relief that filled their hearts was real and profound. They had faced the darkness and prevailed. Father Michaels dropped them off at the pizzeria, which now seemed a sanctuary in the soft morning light. "Be vigilant," he warned them. "Evil is cunning and often lies dormant, waiting. But remember this night, and know that faith and courage can overcome the darkest shadows." As they watched him drive away, Alex and his boss knew that while their ordeal was over, their lives would never be the same. The horrors they had witnessed, the evils they had banished, would stay with them, a reminder of the night they stood together against the darkness and survived. They entered the pizzeria, the bell above the door chiming softly behind them, a sound that now seemed not just welcoming but victorious. As Alex and his boss re-entered the quiet of Tony's Pizza Heaven, the morning light casting long, peaceful shadows through the windows, a palpable sense of relief filled the air. They began cleaning up from the night's hurried exit, straightening chairs, wiping down tables, each movement grounding, returning them to a semblance of normalcy. However, as the morning progressed, a subtle unease began to creep into Alex's mind. Every shadow seemed just a bit too dark, every silence a bit too deep. His experiences from the night haunted the edges of his perception, a constant reminder that the world was full of more shadows and mysteries than he had ever imagined. As they prepared to open the pizzeria for the day, the phone rang, slicing through the quiet. Alex jumped, a reaction born from the previous night's tensions. With a hesitant hand, he picked up the receiver. "Tony's Pizza Heaven, how may I help you?" His voice was steady, but his hand trembled slightly. The line was silent for a moment, then a whisper, soft and chilling, drifted through, "Thank you." The line went dead before Alex could respond. The voice was unrecognizable, ethereal almost, and it sent a shiver down his spine. He placed the receiver down slowly, turning to see his boss staring at him, an eyebrow raised in question. Alex shook his head, unable to fully explain the mixture of relief and residual fear that the call had provoked. "Probably just a prank," his boss suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. They spent the day serving customers, the normalcy of their tasks helping to push away the remnants of fear. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows of the pizzeria, that morning's phone call echoed in Alex's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. As he turned the figurine in his hands, he noticed that one of the tiny windows seemed to flicker, as if reflecting a light that wasn't there. A cold dread settled over him, and he realized that the story wasn't over, perhaps it was never meant to end. He placed the figurine on the counter, a silent sentinel to the unresolved mysteries that lingered. Alex knew that the darkness might never fully recede, that the echoes of those lost souls might whisper forever at the edges of reality. But he also knew that, despite everything, he had faced the darkness and survived. And so, life at Tony's Pizza Heaven went on. The bell above the door chimed for each new customer, the ovens continued to bake delicious pizzas, and the shadows, well, they were just shadows, most of the time. But every once in a while, when the light faded and the world grew quiet, Alex would remember that night, and he would listen, just in case the whispering returned. As the days turned into weeks, the figurine of the Fairwick house sat silently on the counter of Tony's Pizza Heaven, a constant reminder of the dark adventure Alex and his boss had endured. The routine of pizza making and the bustling activity of the pizzeria provided a comforting normalcy, yet the shadow of the past lurked just beneath the surface. One rainy evening, as Alex was closing up, the wind howling outside and the rain tapping rhythmically against the windows, he noticed something peculiar. The figurine's tiny windows, which had flickered that first morning, now glowed steadily with a soft, eerie light. The sight sent a chill down his spine, and a sense of foreboding filled the air, thick and palpable. Drawing a deep breath, Alex leaned closer to examine the figurine. As he did, the front door of the tiny house seemed to open, inviting him into its depths. A whisper, almost inaudible, drifted through the empty pizzeria, "Come back." Shaking off the impossible notion that the figurine was anything more than a model, Alex decided it was time to rid himself of the unsettling object. He reached for the phone to call Father Michaels, seeking advice or perhaps reassurance. But as he dialed, the lights in the pizzeria flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness, with only the soft glow of the figurine illuminating his surroundings. A sudden, sharp knock on the window snapped Alex's attention away from the figurine. Peering into the darkness, he saw nothing but his own reflection against the backdrop of the stormy night. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The phone line crackled to life, Father Michaels's voice a beacon in the enveloping dark. "Alex, what's wrong?" "It's the figurine," Alex said, his voice low. "It's doing something. I think it's not over." "I feared as much," Father Michaels replied, a grave tone to his voice. "Some evils don't relent easily. They cling to whatever anchor they can find in our world." "What should I do?" Alex asked, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "For now, keep it in sight. I will come in the morning. We will deal with it together," Father Michaels instructed, his voice steady and reassuring. Alex spent a restless night in the pizzeria, the figurine glowing ominously on the counter. As dawn broke, the storm cleared, and Father Michaels arrived, his presence a comforting certainty. He examined the figurine closely, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This object has become a conduit," he explained. "A link between our world and the dark energies we thought we had banished. We must sever this link." Together, they prepared a small ritual right there in the pizzeria, using salt and holy water to cleanse the figurine. Father Michaels chanted prayers as Alex watched, the tension building in the air around them. As the final prayer was uttered, the figurine's glow intensified, then abruptly extinguished, as if a light had been snuffed out. A heavy silence filled the room, the sense of an oppressive presence finally lifting. Father Michaels packed the now dark figurine into a box lined with blessed cloth. "I will take this to a place where it can be kept safe, where its dark influence will be contained," he assured Alex. With the figurine gone, a palpable sense of peace returned to Tony's Pizza Heaven. Customers came and went, unaware of the undercurrents that had once threatened to disrupt the calm of their favorite local spot. Alex often found himself reflecting on the events that had transpired. He realized that while the physical reminders of that darkness had been removed, the memories would linger, a reminder of the fragility of the veil between worlds. Yet, as he served pizzas and laughed with customers, he found a new strength in himself, a resilience forged in the crucible of his experiences. He knew that whatever shadows might drift close, he had the power to face them, supported by friends, faith, and the enduring light of the human spirit. In the end, Tony's Pizza Heaven remained a place of warmth and light, a beacon in the small town of Draycote, where the extraordinary had touched the ordinary, leaving behind not just fear, but also a profound appreciation for the everyday miracles of life and the deeper bonds it had fostered. As the bell above the door chimed with each new and returning customer, it was a sound that now seemed not just welcoming but victorious, a testament to the enduring light in the face of darkness.